All right. Good morning. It's Wednesday, October 7th. We're making some serious progress in the course and in the semester. I want to give you a couple of announcements before we get started. One is that Kristen has already posted this, but there's a quiz on the allergies lecture. And it's been posted, so you see that. And I believe it's due Friday by 5 p.m. Again, it's a 5-question quiz, so it's an opportunity for you to take a look at your allergy notes, and then it's an open book. But what we do is I would study my allergy notes first, then open the quiz, because the quiz itself is timed, but you have your notes in front of you, so it's an opportunity to review your notes to kind of help you get started studying. Okay. Another thing, I need to let you know that my computer crashed. My battery went out, and so I had to go to the university and get another computer, and the other computer doesn't have PowerPoint or most of the things on it, and I'm just using it for 2 or 3 days. So my presentation today is in Keynote, which is a Mac thing, so it looks a little different, and I couldn't make it perfect, and I feel sad. But just so you know, I should get the computer back in a few weeks, but it's kind of affected my artistry. Also, we will have at some point, not too far in the future, an assignment. I mentioned this last time, to watch a video. I have it posted. So I will tell you to watch this video. It has to do with pediatric obesity. And you learn so much from this video, and it's fun, right? We all like to learn from videos as opposed to, reading, I guess. I don't know if that's true, but so I want you to, usually I would spend time in class showing a full hour of this video, but I don't want to do that because our time is more limited and kind of more precious because we're limited by our locations. I also wanted to remind you that your research papers are due next week on Wednesday. All right, so remember, look and see what all is due then. They're your research paper and also peer evaluations. So don't forget to do that piece as well. And then finally, Kristen is working on a lecture on school meals. And Kristen, your plans for this, is it to be a completely a video delivery, or are you going to deliver it and have the video? Have you decided yet?
I haven't fully decided. Definitely
Okay.
video. I think it might be video and then discussion.
Perfect. Okay. So that'll be next Monday, and then after that we're done with kids. I mean, mostly, not all the way. Then we'll get into prior to pregnancy and sort of totally different set of information. Okay, before I get started past this, if you have any questions about the exam or quizzes today, the first thing you want to do is write Kristen about it. This is part of, she's giving a lecture because that's part of her training. She's working on grading, that's part of her training. And so the reason that she is the go-to person first is she's being trained in academia, but she and I work together. So if you have any issues, go ahead and write her, and then she and I will communicate about it. So I think I'm ready to share my screen now. And again, this time, hold on just a second. Yeah. Okay, so I believe you can see, it's too small right now, but I believe you can see my screen. And I wanted to go where we left off last time. We were talking about child nutrition. Trying to make this the best quality possible. Not perfect. Does everybody see this? Somebody say yes. Yes, I see. Body imaging and guiding is the
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we left off last time. We were talking about this, and one of the things we were saying is, these eating practices happen early in life, but they have a lifelong ramifications. These relationships with parents, how food is offered, So during, as kids get older, it's not just internal factors that decide what they're going to eat. Like, it's not just their hunger, even if they're hunger is innate, so they have hunger, but then everything in their life also affects what they're going to do, what they're going to eat, how much they're going to eat. And we're going to talk a bit about parenting styles in the next few slides. So hang on to that, because parenting styles can have a big impact on a child's relationship with food and understanding. So we've mentioned responsive parenting before, and now we're going to introduce a new term, authoritative parenting. It's on the next couple of slides. One thing I wanted to tell you now is I can't, with this interface of Keynote versus PowerPoint, I cannot point with my mouse anymore. So I can like point at the screen, which won't work at all. I apologize. So authoritative is in green. The sad part is children start so young with developing weight issues, as young as 8 years of age, even younger. And so we'll talk about advertising and the role that advertising has on this. So not just advertising for foods, but the fact that we advertise thinness and sexuality and stuff so much across our nation. You can't look anywhere without seeing this focus on body image. It's hard for kids to navigate this and parents to navigate this. So sometimes kids start dieting at a very young age, and with serious ramifications. You all know from your education today that dieting, like trying to eat less, to starve, to lose weight doesn't work. Eating healthful foods and having an active lifestyle works, but trying to just restrict always rebounds. And so they get into this yo-yo pattern sometimes when they're way too young to have to deal with this. So I mentioned parenting feeding styles a couple slides ago, and I want to draw, I can't point, okay, I want to draw attention to these four different types of parenting styles. The first one I'm going to talk about is authoritarian, then permissive, then neglectful, and then authoritative. And I'll tell you right off that the best one for probably just raising healthy kids and certainly for fostering appropriate feeding practices is authoritative parenting. So let's talk about what these styles are. So the first one, now let me draw a line here. Authoritarian, the first one, is different than authoritative. Okay, so we're first talking about authoritarian, not the good one, but a style, okay? So keep that in mind. I want to make sure you see the difference between those terms. So authoritarian parenting and feeding styles is defined as being high demanding, low response. What that means is the parent has lots of rules, my way or the highway. You live in my house, you're going to do it my way. At the mealtime, you have to sit there till you finish your plate, or whatever rules they feel are important. So they set the rules so the kids are required to be, mind, but and so there's strict demands, regardless of the age of the kid. It can be a 2-year-old kid, and they're like, you sit down and you get this done, right? That type of thing. And but the deal is low responsiveness means that they're not listening to the child and paying attention to the age of the child and the ability of the child to master or to do certain things. Now they're doing good to get a spoon to their mouth at age 2. So it gets hard when it's more demanding. And this type of style may influence children to gain excess weight as they go older. Part of it, I'm not going to go into the psychology of it, but anyway, so that's one of the things, being demanding. And also eating disorders come out oftentimes of demanding authoritarian families. Okay, the next type. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to talk about these feeding styles and decide which ones foster the best practices. So I'm just going to double check on this. So authoritarian, here's what it is. It does not work. It's not a good idea for fostering healthy dietary habits. Okay, the second one, permissive or indulgent. I think you can figure this out. They don't have a lot of demands of these kids, but they can be very, very responsive. So they don't require that kids do whatever. They do respect them and provide warmth, but they also cater to the child. This may be the family that says, "Oh, you want donuts for breakfast? Sure, honey, that'd be great. I love you. Here's some more sugar. Here's this, and this." And so there's not you have to eat your broccoli to figure out if this is good or not. And that's another story entirely, but more of what do you want? And we all know that our food environment, especially for children, is filled with sugar. So can really foster poor habits. For the child, they have a much stronger risk than other family styles for developing obesity. And because they're provided with sugary and salty foods, they're more likely to reject new foods. You know, probably most of us think if you have a bite of donut, broccoli right after that doesn't work so well. So another style is neglectful or uninvolved. And this is low demandingness and low responsiveness. What that means is not many rules and I'm not paying attention to you. So neglectful, I think, speaks for itself. So parents don't place demands on a child and are unaware of their needs or opinions. And so this is kind of all over the board. Obviously, most of us know that this is not going to be foster healthful growth in the family too. But I brought this up because, I mean, I chose this figure, which looked better on my computer, because I'm an observer like all of us are. You probably observe people and foods that they order in grocery store. What do people buy? And, you know, what's the world like right now? What do they serve in school meals and so on. So I'm always looking at those things to try to figure out what's going on in the American population. What do we need to do to train young professionals to help make a difference? And I don't know if you see this, but a lot I see families doing this very thing, where they go out to meals and everybody's doing something else on their phone. The only thing is I often see the kids have one too. Anybody see this or think about it?
Yes, they also have at a lot of restaurants now, they have screens to give the kids. I think Chili's has it, and trying to think, Olive Garden has it, I know. So you can pay $1 and they give you a screen for the kids to play. And it's, you know, I know when I went out to eat with my kids and I saw that initially, I was like, this is great. So I kind of felt like I had time to spend with my husband at dinner. We could have an adult conversation when they were younger. But now my kids are 10 and 12 and it's kind of the opposite. It's like, no, let's put these away. But yeah, I've seen those.
I appreciate that comment because the same kids that you start out with young are going to stay with you, right? And so what the world used to have before screens was family time at the dinner table. It wasn't always good for everybody. We talked about this last time. Some family dinners are stressful, but if parents mindfully foster helpful discourse during dinner, things like, what did you learn today? How are things going? You know, what's the most fun you had? If you could change anything, what would you do? Just kind of having people explore their thoughts and their relationships. It's called dining, and dining is a good thing. And we've kind of stopped it, especially in America, you know, or in North America. What we do is we even drive through. We don't dine, we drive through and shovel food in our mouth on the way down the road, right? Or go to restaurants and neglect our kids but if you spend these first years teaching them manners and teaching them the art of dining, then you've got a lifetime of fun to eat together. So it's work. But thank you. But I see this all the time. I've seen so many. I have some pictures, but you know, it's people I take pictures up in the wild, so I don't show them. Okay, here's the good one. Sorry, I know that's a beautiful child, just bringing that up, but here's the good one. Authoritative. Let's put stars all around this. If you were to pick a parenting and feeding style that's considered optimal, it would be authoritative. So you have rules. High demandingness means you have rules. High responsiveness means that you interact with the child. You listen to the child. You want them to have autonomy, but you want to guide them there because they're not ready yet. Come on, a 3-year-old doesn't know what they should eat. They need lots of work with parents, and they need lots of examples. And so what this basically means is they have reasonable expectations. they respect the child, they provide warmth. It's a lot about like that responsive feeding that we talked about. And this type of relationship, parenting style, fosters the good behaviors that we're trying to get. More fruits and vegetables, lower risk of overweight, increased physical activity, and decreases the negative behaviors, more risky behaviors, drug behaviors, sedentary, and so on. So mindfully, being an authoritative parent is a great way to go to help kids have that healthful relationship with food. You can't control how much they're going to eat over their life. You can't control their body weight. You can help them have a healthy relationship with food and enjoy meals and be involved and all that kind of stuff. But they're going to eventually end up with their own decision about the health. You can help guide them because you're all they have right at first. They don't have any other information. Okay, so I'm going to kill that. So I don't know what's going to happen to our. Hold on. Back to Zoom. Oh, come on.
Dr. Prashel.
Yeah.
So question, so if like parenting feeding skill is saying, okay, yes, I'll allow you to have, this for lunch. I'll allow you to have this like French fries at lunch or whatever. But then tonight at dinner, like you have to eat cucumbers, right? Would that be more of the last one or the passive one? Let me see.
So that is such a good question because it gets at the reality of it. And I'm gonna remember I talked to you about Ellen Satter a couple lectures ago about complementary feeding and forming that relationship and the division of responsibility where parents provide what and kids decide what is offered and when, and kids decide what they're going to eat and how much. So bargaining is never really a functional thing to start because kids have 100% of their energy at getting around your rules, and you give them 20% of your energy because you're making a living and handling the household and doing all this kind of stuff. And so they'll focus on how to get, we have this, I don't know if addiction's forever, but we have a propensity to want sugar, and kids certainly are there. So they're going to figure out how to get that, right? And so I don't know how many kids would honor, I'll eat my cucumber now and then I'll eat M&Ms later, or I'll eat M&Ms now and I'll do the cucumber later. But really what we need to do is not bargain it. One of the things we're doing with that is we're letting them know that the restricted foods are so desirable, that's your treat. All right. And so that's, instead of thinking, wow, this really nice bean burrito is a really good treat, enjoy that. We let them know that, that the treats that are really unhealthy are the things that are desirable. So bargaining is not how we want to do this, but a way to do it. What Ellen Satter does is she goes, if you have dinner, let's say Fridays, and she doesn't recommend not offering sweets, when kids are older, because it can backfire and get weird if you go, my house never does any of this stuff, and then it's almost too restrictive, and they go to somebody else's house and eat sugar for 5 years, right? So you have to have some balance in your home, and one way to do that is to have a dessert night. Maybe on Fridays our family eats this and has dessert and watches a movie, or some kind of thing to have fun with, so they can expect to have those treats. So they're not so weird and so important that they can't have them. But the bargaining, I've seen parents do this in the store too. Back when we went to stores, right? They would go to Walmart, and I'd see kids at Walmart, and the parents would go, look, if you just shut up, you can have this cookie. And you know how big cookies are now, right? And so we do this, they're everywhere. You can't go to a store without these items right there for the kids, and they're always begging for them. And so it becomes a struggle. So what we don't want to do is assign to sugary foods, these are the desirable foods, and then assign to all the healthy stuff, well, this is stuff you have to eat in order to have the fun stuff. Does that make sense? It's hard, it's kind of hard to get at, but so Ellen Satter would say, if you're gonna have, you can have dessert night, or if you're gonna have dessert for dinner, go ahead and put the food out, and then everybody eats, and when everybody's done, then put the dessert out and calm down. If they're gonna eat more dessert, then it's a good thing you don't do it once a week, but at least they know that it's not overstated how bad it is to do that. Does that make sense? It's a little nuanced, like everything about nutrition.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it's just one of those things that needs to be incorporated from the beginning.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah. Yeah, because I have a 10 and a 12-year-old, and my husband and my diet are very different. We eat very different. There have been times where I've literally, I think I'm more of the catering, listening. I kind of try to make everybody happy. But the more that I learn, the more that I've been in school, the more I'm trying to change my children's diet and to something healthier. So I educate them and I teach them what I'm learning and about how good it is for them. But it's hard. It's hard, especially with my daughter. It's so much hard. It's hard to get her to eat more things that I didn't incorporate earlier in her life. So.
Yeah. Well, you know, all we can do is our best. But I have to tell you, don't give up hope here, because kids develop a more sophisticated palate when they get older. You know, my son only ate bean burritos, and this is my fault because that's basically all I gave him. I was in grad school and I had him, right? And so around the age of 10, he started eating salads, and he wouldn't eat them before then, but I let him, you know, sort of bastardize them. I let him take the middle out of rolls and put lettuce in it and eat it, you know, just I let my kids play with their food. So, but now he's got a really, really varied palate, but it came on him later. So having healthy foods in the household, you can do that. And, you know, you can't force people to eat, but you can provide those exposures and it'll matter, right? None of this is like just black and white. That's the part that's interesting. We want to be able to just have a set of rules, and it's kind of hard to do that. Okay, so I'm gonna see if I can share. Let's see, I've got my screen up here. All right. This may look a little bit weird because of the keynote. Those of you who are at the beginning, I'm having more and more fun with computers. So here we go. So everybody see this okay? Kristen said yes. If the answer is no, please holler. Okay.
I can't see anything.
You can't? Oh,
No,
am I not?
It just says you've started screen sharing on a black screen for me.
Oh my goodness. Anybody else? Who else has that?
I can see it just fine.
Yeah, I can see it too.
Maybe it's me.
What computer do you have?
A Lenovo ThinkPad, I think.
Have you been using it though?
Yeah, I've been using it since the beginning of the semester.
Huh. Boy, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna stop share real. Hold on. I don't have a mouse. Oh. Okay, hold on. Yeah, I get it. So I'm gonna stop share, and then I'm gonna share it again just in case. So for some reason that picks up for you. Troy, that was you, right? Can you see it?
Still, it just says screen sharing. I don't know. It's okay.
I'm so sorry. Okay, well, I will post this, and the lecture's up, and I'm so sorry. So just take extra good notes, okay?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
don't know how to address this right now. I'm so terribly sorry. Okay, so a lot of this I'm talking about visuals, so I'll try to remember to tell you what's going on, Troy. So the first slide here is the title is Child Overweight and Obesity, and the slide is of a child that has lots of body fat in his abdomen. And what you see here is you see his arms are have fat on them and so forth. And I show this picture on purpose for a variety of reasons. One is I want to emphasize that we should not show such images when we're giving talks to parents about overweight and obesity, because I find it pejorative and negative. And there's lots of research that indicates that we need to be mindful and kind and not make life harder for people. So it's very easy if you were, I've made these lectures for years, you go look on, Google Images and go look for, overweight kids. There's a zillion of them, and some of them are sensationalistic, right? They'll be very heavy kids. And that doesn't help in understanding information or portraying information. It can make people feel bad. So I show this to bring that up. I also show it for another reason, and that is that notice the kid's face is not showing there. Well, you wouldn't do that with a child anyway. But in our culture right now, when we show bodies, it's very true with women in advertising as well. We sometimes cut off the head and just show certain body parts, and it's not a respectful whole person approach to health. So I just want to bring this up. So be careful if you give talks in communities after you become a professional about overweight, be sensitive to these things because parents are very worried. Okay, so we're going to talk about some definitions, terms, consequences, causes, and what we know about solutions for child obesity. Okay, so first off, how do we determine if a child, now notice this says over the age of 2. So I'm going to talk about younger kids in a minute, but we're going to start out with ages 2 to 19. How do we know if that child is overweight or, and look at my language here, has obesity? Notice I don't say is overweight, weight, or obese. In the past, probably 4 or 5 years, the language, the professional language has changed to say that children have obesity instead of they are obese. So it's more like having diabetes versus you are a diabetic. It seems more a condition that we can help them with, right? So it's a little more respectful. So, you know, I have this picture here of these 3 kids. Can you really tell the difference? You know, how do you tell if the kid on the left or the kid in the middle or the kid on the right? How do you really know what their classification is? And why do we care? Well, we care because overweight and obesity are directly associated with health outcomes. So if we don't pay attention to this, we're not promoting the health of the child as we need to. So let's keep going here. So the question was, okay, I'm gonna calm down. How do we determine if a child ages 2 to 19 is overweight or has obesity? You know this, you've all had nutritional assessment. You calculate their BMI. Here's the equation. And then look at number 2, you plot their body mass index on and I want you to pay attention to this language. At 2000, that means the year that it was developed, a 2000 CDC sex-specific BMI growth chart. That's a mouthful. Okay, so sex-specific means there's different BMI growth charts for boys and girls. Okay, so that's what the sex-specific means. I read and do research with child overweight, and every single solitary paper, when they're talking about how they figured out BMI, they always use this exact language. Okay, so here's an image of one of these growth charts, and again, I can't point, but you know, you see the kid on the left, he's standing, he's old enough, he's between 2 and 20 years, so he's old enough to stand up, he's not lying down, he's bigger. And so she's carefully measuring his height. In a clinical setting, you might want to measure twice or 3 times to make sure you're right, because differences and mistakes in this measuring can make a difference in the diagnosis, which can have an effect on people. So, and then you plot. So if you look at the graph on the right, we have these growth chart curves. So this is a body mass index growth chart. What do you notice right off about the shape of those lines?
It dips down at 4 years old.
Yeah, right. So it changes. So this is, each of these lines is a you know, shows how BMI changes over time. So if you look at age 2, let's look at the 95th percentile. You go 2 is the very left, and you go up to the top, and you can see at the 95th percentile there's a BMI, I don't know, 19, under 19.5 and greater. That would be the BMI value. Okay, and notice how that's at age 2, but notice as that kid gets older, just like you said, around age 4 or 5, their BMI is lower. That's because when they're younger, they have more body fat per height. And then our normal development is to then slim down, right? And then slowly start increasing body weight. This is how we typically grow as humans. Okay, so body mass index changes. That's why we define overweight and obesity in kids different than we do with adults. Do you remember what the designation for overweight, BMI number for overweight is for adults?
Is it above 85 percentile?
We don't use, for adults, we don't use percentiles. Okay, for adults, we use numbers. We have BMI cutoff values, like a BMI of certain number indicates overweight. Y'all remember?
28?
Okay, no, it's actually 25.
25.
Yeah, that's cool. That's why I asked you to kind of review. Okay, so for adults, you do the same math. There's BMI calculators all over the internet. So you do the same thing. You calculate your BMI and then you plot. Okay, but for adults, we're not looking at these curves anymore because we're one size now, right? We're not growing anymore, except for weight gain, right? We're not getting taller. So we look at certain numbers. So for adults, 25 is overweight and a BMI of 30 is overweight or becomes obese, right? And so that's where our cutoffs are. So we have specific numbers. They're not percentiles here like this. We just use flat out numbers. Now, in this case, the percentiles, look at that top graph there. See the 95? That is a kid that's on the higher end of BMI. All right, and so I'm going to talk a little bit more about where these graphs came from, but I just want you to take a look at this. Okay, where do the BMI growth curves come from? Okay, get your head around this. We have been seeing an increase in the rate of child obesity for several decades now, but we have a robust set of data from the 1960s. And from that data, these charts were drawn. We didn't start measuring we didn't start using BMI charts until the year 2000, but those lines there are based on the body weight of kids in the 1960s, before we had an obesity epidemic. Okay, so that's what these graphs don't change year after year. What we see is more and more kids are over the 95th percentile. Okay, so just remember that body mass index changes with age, and it gives us an estimate of body fat, but you all know it's not perfect. There can be some kids that are very muscular, that people can be different. There's certainly adults that are very muscular, and so they can have a high BMI. It doesn't mean they're overweight or obese. But we still, it's one of the measures that we use. It's pretty well accepted. So the thing I want you to remember is this chart shows the distribution of kids in the population with respect to their body mass index around 1960. So the 95th percentile meant that if a kid's on that line, 5% of kids have a greater BMI, and 95% of kids have a lower BMI than they do. So it gives you an idea about where you fall. Now, what do we do with these numbers? Okay, this is a diagram on the left that's a lot prettier to look at. Don't worry about it saying girls or boys, it doesn't matter. So cross that out because I can't get it out of my keynote. Okay, on the left, look at the bottom. The age 2 to 18 is on the bottom part of the graph, and BMI is on the left-hand side. This is the same kind of graph you just looked at, except it's colored and pretty. Okay, and these are the numbers that we use for definitions. So for example, at the 95th percentile, anything above the 95th percentile, greater than or equal to the 95th percentile, is identified as a child having obesity. If a child is between the 85th and 95th percentile, they are considered to be overweight. The ideal weight is somewhere in the middle. You know, ideal weight is a funny term, but it is what it is, right? So normal, healthy, fewer risk factors for disease is in that golden area. And then underweight is less than the 5th percentile. Okay, so these graphs are imperfect, but they get us a give us a pretty good idea. If a child is consistently over the 85th or 95th percentile, they're at risk. Okay. Does that make sense? I'm going to talk about younger kids now. So let me ask you, how do you determine whether a child ages 2 to 18 or 19 has obesity? How would you determine that? What would you do?
Through their weight and length?
You do figure out their weight, and then what else?
The length,
Their height.
Beautiful. With their height and weight, then what do you calculate?
BMI.
Right, you calculate BMI, and then you look at a chart like this, and they're all over the internet, right? To decide where they fall. So you need to be careful. Remember, the age determines, the age at the bottom is important. So if it's a 4-year-old child, that's different than a 7-year-old child, okay, or a 9-year-old child, because body fat changes, and that's normal. But we use these graphs. Remember that they are sex-specific BMI growth charts. Is everybody good?
Yes.
Kristen, have any questions for them?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to younger kids because we do it differently. We don't use BMI for little kids yet. Okay, so how do we talk about their weight status? Okay, so here's a picture of a kid on the scale, and in reality, they're going to take the diaper off. But nonetheless, okay, so you measure their weight and their recumbent length. Remember, we're going to measure their length lying down. And then you plot it on a CDC sex-specific weight for length growth chart. So circle weight for length. Okay, for 0 to 2, we're looking at the weight for length growth charts. Older kids, we use BMI growth charts. Okay, so little kids have a different set of growth charts. And those who fall over the 97.7th percentile have obesity. Now, if they're above 95 or 85, it's still of concern. Now, the last number here, the last bullet here, I just wanted to let you know, at some point, they're probably going to use BMI for little kids, but they don't yet. So it's not being used now. I just thought somebody might be interested in that. All right, so here's this growth chart. Now, we are looking for the bottom part there is weight for length. Okay, and so you plot the kids on the weight for length growth chart. And this data, just so you know, for little kids is based on a nationally and internationally representative sample of kids that were mostly breastfed. And so these should be considered healthful lines. And so it's appropriate to use these lines to measure how kids fall into being overweight or obese. And so having obesity is a very high number there. To create these graphs, they use children with their mostly breastfed, but if moms smoked or there are multiple births, they did not put those kids in this data. Kids who are born to maternal smoker are often really small. I'll talk about that later. Okay, so now let's talk about trends. Now we know how we define pediatric obesity, so let's look at what's been happening. All right, this is a graph, or sorry, I apologize. This is a table showing you one of the more recent sets of data on child overweight and obesity. These data are published every so often, and the purpose of this chart is to show you that how the numbers have changed. So I can't point, so just bear with me here. On the combined, look at the right-hand side, combined overweight and obesity. And if you start with kids ages 2 to 5, that's that second row, you can see in 1990, 2000, 22% of kids in that group were overweight or obese. And then go to the next year, the next column, 2003 to 4, notice that number went up. Now the next one it went down a little bit. So that was a hopeful trend. So let's look at kids ages, let's just, let's just do the bottom, 2 to 19. Okay, 2 to 19, if you look under 2011 to 2014 column, at that period of time, 17% of kids were either overweight or obese. And as you can see, as time went by, that number increased pretty much dramatically. So we've had some ups and downs, but the reality shows that we have a national emergency. More and more kids are being diagnosed as being overweight or obese, and the trends are just as bad or worse now than they were at this last data point.
Dr. Crishaw, why do you think that in 2011 and 2012 it declined?
Sometimes there's been policies, and we hope they're policies, right? So there's been studies going, hey, we fixed this, we did this, but in reality, it pretty much goes up and down. I can speak more to what's not on this graph and the younger kids. There's been some good, well, actually 0 to 5, there's been some good trends. And sometimes we think maybe participating in WIC may be beneficial, but it's not just cut and dried. So there may be some of if the kids are in childcare, policies for childcare diets have improved. So this may be, some of those trends could be because what the food that we're providing the kids is better, and they're more likely to be active. So that's our dream, right? But it goes up and down, so we can't just, oh boy, my arm's bleeding, I'm sorry. I've always got something wrong. Okay, so here's a quick graph. Sorry, it's gross as blood all before. Not funny. Okay, so here's a graph just to show you what where the problems are. So we're interested in Texas. So this is kids ages 10 to 17 over the 85th percentile, means they're overweight, or they could be obese too, depending on how high they are. And you take a look at the map here, and you can see that we're not in a good group. And this cluster of states, we probably have talked about this before, but this cluster of states typically houses more people that are low income, have decreased, less physical activity, more calorie intake, more incidence of diabetes, all those health parameters kind of cluster here. So just something to think about. So one more comment here is about another issue about health disparity. Okay, I had several slides on this, and I decided just to narrow it down to this one slide to make the point. So if you look here, you can see it's prevalence of obesity by race and Hispanic, sex and race and Hispanic origin. And then look at the top, you can see the key. So non-Hispanic white is dark blue, non-Hispanic black is light blue, and then the non-Hispanic Asian is green, and then Hispanic. So you can just see the goal here is to see what trends there are, and that can help guide policy on who needs more help. Okay, and so and try to figure out what is causing these changes. So if you look at the at this, I can't point. Okay, you look at the distribution here. The total, you can see the Hispanic children are much more likely to be obese. Okay, so this is over the 95th percentile. Okay, and then Asian is the lowest risk under total, and then non-Hispanic black is at high risk, and then Caucasian kids or non-Hispanic white kids are at 14.1. So that's the total. But then if you look at boys and girls, you can see a little bit of a trend difference. In particular, among boys, the highest risk group is Hispanic boys. And among girls, the chart on the right-hand side, the highest risk group is non-Hispanic black girls. Okay, so we're going to talk about causes and consequences of obesity first, but I wanted to point out this health disparity. And you get into causes, so keep this in your mind and be thinking about why would there be such a difference, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so this is a figure I just took out of the Michael and Susan Dell Center. They publish information about child obesity for kids every year, every 2 years. So here's our numbers now. Texas has the 19th highest obesity rate in the nation and the 10th highest adult obesity rate. Okay, so we're in the not healthful group. Another way to put this is over 600,000 Texas youth ages 10 to 17 have obesity. And in Texas, Hispanic and African American children have nearly twice the rate of obesity compared to non-Hispanic white children. You look at the graph at the bottom that mimics what we just looked at. Okay, who are the higher risk groups? Now notice this is 8th grade kids. This is just because this is how the data is collected. They don't collect it all up and down. They pick certain age groups and they collect that data over and over again. So same thing, we're looking at childhood obesity is a problem that's not going away. Even if the numbers go down, they're still scary. And going down, we need to get them down to where they were in 1960. Okay, I bring up San Marcos here because this is another health disparity, and I've done some research here in San Marcos. Okay, and so what prompted me to do this research is, and this is pretty recent data, but over the past few years, I actually knew people that collected data. So I knew the obesity and overweight rates of kids in San Marcos. And look at that number. It's over half, right? The number of kids with obesity, let's look at this, 2 to 19, the whole group, okay? 31%, or 34% for 12 to 19. So keep that 30 something, 30-ish. And then look at San Marcos. Does that seem different? Is 51 more than 30?
It's very different.
I can't see you, so I'm talking to the wall. It works. Anyway, 51 is a lot worse than 30. Okay, and so because of these numbers, this talk about a population that's at high risk. So you wonder what's going on with these kids. Why are kids in San Marcos uniquely experiencing obesity and overweight? So I will tell you that I found some answers to this question. I did look at research in San Marcos. I looked at feeding practices in San Marcos and child care centers, and also in WIC. And I found that, and I think I talked about this before, I found that the kids consume way too much protein compared to national sample. So when you look at what kids in San Marcos eat, they're eating enough protein for me, like 60 grams of protein a day, whereas they need, depending on their age, maybe 20, right? And so they're eating too much protein, and we think that the protein may be fostering too much growth. Now, there's also physical activity, diet and so forth. The school meals in San Marcos aren't as good as those in Austin, for example. So, but anyway, just so you know, this is a health disparity, and so it's important. Okay, why do we care so much? All right, so this is my original artwork. So what does obesity do to health? Okay, first of all, go down the very bottom and see obesity in adulthood. If a child makes it to age 5 and has obesity or is overweight, they're much more likely to continue to track into adulthood as obese. So that's one thing, is it's scary because there's a lifetime of hurt involved in this. Okay, so let's look at the top here: impaired social emotional functioning, and then sad, bullying, low self-esteem, those kind of light blue ones. One of the first things that happens with kids is they feel left out, they feel bullied, they don't want to go to school, they feel bad about themselves, they get depressed. And so there's that whole psychological suffering that affects how well they do in school. It affects, they're basically the rest of their lives. Okay, so those are emotional issues. Then there's also, starting at the top right, high blood pressure. Kids have high blood pressure too early. Type 2 diabetes starts early. Heart disease, even in 14-year-olds. On the left-hand side, breathing problems. Kids get so much fat around their throat area that they have trouble sleeping at night, and sleep apnea means they stop breathing. And so a kid with sleep apnea maybe stop breathing several times a minute. And then there's some ways to diagnose this, but that's very serious. And so what happens when they have that is they go to school and they're not paying attention. That slide I just showed with the kids sitting there like this, that's a kid with sleep apnea, right? He's tired. And so, so that's one of the ramifications. And then acid reflux, same thing, fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease starts very young with these kids, bone deformities, which I'm going to show you, and also lifetime issues with reproductive function. So this is serious. When we talk about child obesity, we're looking at the entire trajectory of their life and their quality of life. This is
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, and it's specifically talking about BMI. So in your opinion, when would you say it would be a good idea to look at, say, BMI plus something else? Because I know that like in other courses and stuff like that, and even me where I stand now at age 24, if I look at just BMI, I'm considered overweight. But then if I look at BMI plus overall body composition, so like fat mass versus muscle mass and things of that nature, I know it probably wouldn't be advantageous to look at that from like, say, probably like 2 years old all the way up until probably you get into the teens. But when would you say would be the best time to kind of look at BMI plus other body composition measures?
What the problem with that whole issue is access to healthcare, right? Because it's expensive. And I'm going to have y'all look at a video that talks about this and assessing kids that are overweight and trying to help them and what professionals do and what families do. And so if they can get into a program that specializes on obesity and overweight, then body fat can be assessed, right? But that's expensive. And then right now, we're looking at Texas has more uninsured children than all the other states put together. So if children in Texas are experiencing some of these problems, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to have access to healthcare to the extent that someone could not just do a BMI, but also do an analysis. So it's absolutely needed, but I just don't think we have the resources for it. That's a sad answer. I'm sorry. But
it makes sense because like the BMI, it's relatively easy to calculate, for somebody that's math literate, to do the calculations there. But I was just wondering if, like, would it be a situation where once, that there's that integration of the medical field into that child's life, they would start to consider multiple different, kind of disease state factors instead of just looking at BMI, because BMI can sometimes be less reliable. I know when you're starting to talk about, obesity classes 1, 2, and 3, it kind of becomes hard to argue, okay, how are you, just have that much, fat mass and muscle mass to be that, far into the BMI scale. But I guess that's kind of more so on the overweight thing, like how there's a lot of people that are categorized as overweight if they only use that scale. Like for me, for instance, like from ages probably like 15 to up until now, I've always been teetering between that overweight, normal weight. And it's always been because it's like, well, during a certain time of the year, I'm active playing sports, stuff like that, putting on muscle. Other parts of the year, my weight may fluctuate. And so my mother was always concerned because she was like, well, according to this, chart, it's just you're overweight. But if we look at other factors along with it, it kind of tells a better story.
Well, see, that's a good point. And if we have comprehensive healthcare, also measuring blood pressure for kids, looking at their blood sugar, right? And seeing if they have these metabolic parameters that indicate illness, then that would be one way to do it. But one thing I do want to say though is, one thing that's happened is that the body weight of kids have changed. And along that, our perception has changed as to what seems like a healthy body weight and what seems like overweight. If you looked at kids in the 1960s, most of them were skinny by today's standard. You look now, and we've had this huge change where more and more kids are classified as overweight or obese. And so parents that have thin children sometimes think they're underweight. And so we start to not understand the norm. Okay. So, but you can look at activity, but I'm still going to say, no matter what, you want to help children not become overweight. you know, in the younger years, if prevention is the best thing about this. But you're right, everything's imperfect. So this is a list of the problems that I just have on this previous slide. So I like pictures, so that's why I did this. But this is the list, okay? And so we're using more scientific terms, right? So blood glucose, reproductive issues, you know, psychological issues, pulmonary, skeletal problems, which I'm going to talk about. So these are the same things, just using more clinical nutrition language as opposed to what are the problems. In terms of your test question, because I can just see the light bulbs go off, either way, if you can describe the problems, you can use this language, or you can use a more user-friendly language. When you're working with people, you're going to want to use user-friendly language, right? More likely, it gets to health literacy we were talking about. So parents, you need to meet them where they are. So they may be better telling them that there's you know, risk for heart disease because the fat in their blood is higher, the cholesterol is high versus some of the other things you might say. Okay, I like to talk about this because I think it really highlights that it's not an even playing field. So as kids, the earlier they become obese, the more problem they have with bone structure. They have more fractures. Part of that is because of inactivity begets, you know, lack of strength, poor balance. And it's hard for them to be treated because of the body fat, they can't use casts, which make it easier. So they use splints, and there's more complications, you know, with skin potentially, and often they have to have surgery instead of a cast. And so surgery, then you've got to have anesthesia, and then you've got to be good at using that. And so they have problems healing. And so this is just one example of how a child's life can be affected. And then there's bone deformities. And I just want you to see an image of this. So on the left is Blount disease. And you can see that the child's legs are kind of bowed in and bowed out a little bit. And this has to do with development, extra weight on the bones during development that affect how they grow. Now, there's a number of other causes for bowed legs in kids that don't have anything to do with weight, but this is what I'm talking about here. And then this is an important one, the slipped capital femoral epiphysis. In other words, the ball and socket joint, okay? That ball and socket joint here, you can look on the right there, you can see that it's a little out of whack, okay? And what that means is it's not seated well, and what the child may be experiencing is knee pain. Okay, so the knee pain, they're having trouble with their knees, and upon reflection, upon x-ray, they go, oh, we've got a problem with your ball and socket joint. And it's not easy to do surgery on things like this because these are growing bones. And so typically kids have pain and they need to get bed rest and need to lose weight to remove this kind of pressure. So just an example of what can happen. All right, so there's also cost. I'm not going to ask you all of these things. I like to give you information. You just need to know that obesity, child overweight and obesity costs a lot of money. You know, we're in a world where healthcare is limited. We don't provide for the bulk of our population in general. Children are often left out, and yet they become sick when they're overweight and more likely to have type diabetes and all these kinds of things and need more expensive healthcare. And I don't have to tell you now, with COVID going on, you know, adults are more at risk that have these comorbidities too, right? So the cost, you know, some people are paying tens and tens of thousands of dollars for COVID treatment. And part of it is they have this increased risk because of being overweight or having other metabolic issues. Kids are also affected at school. They don't do as well. They don't go to school as often. And when they get older, if you follow people based on body weight, they're less likely to make as much money, more likely to be sick, and less likely to get hired. So there's it's a lifetime, not for everybody, but it's not an even playing field. Okay, so this slide introduces the causes of pediatric obesity, and you know, so up on the left is those are, I don't know what those are. They're supposed to be antibiotics though, because there's been some studies that show that antibiotics for kids taking antibiotics early on may mess with their microbiome. That's the mean looking guys on the right. Okay, we have y'all know we have microbiome. We have lots of bacteria in our gut. Some of them are helpful, some of them are not. Some of them actually cause us to harvest more calories from our food than others. So certain patterns of bacteria are good or bad depending on weight gain, right? And so antibiotics can wipe out a healthy microbiome. And there's been some studies that have been able to trace antibiotic use to increased risk for being overweight. So I don't have a recommendation like don't take antibiotics, because when kids get infections and they need them, that's different. It's also a medical issue. I just want to bring this up so you're aware of it. Other causes at the bottom are no-brainer. We all know this. Okay, so this is, I want you to write this down. So I guess Kristen, you can type this. Kristen, are you still here? Oh, she had class. Okay.
I'm here.
Okay, right. I don't see you anymore. Socio, yeah, write it in the chat. Okay, SOCIO, socio dash ecological model. So socio-ecological model. This is a diagram. It's an example of a socio-ecological model. And what it is showing, hold on. What it is showing, never mind. Seriously?
Maybe click on the PowerPoint screen.
I have been doing that. There you go. It's Keynote. Oh, there you go. Sorry, it's Keynote. It just acts funny. I didn't do that. All right. All right. So this model here intends to diagram what affects body weight. And there's models for all kinds of health behaviors, like what affects whether or not a kid smokes. What affects whether or not kids get involved in drugs. This is a model, what affects body weight. And so we've got this teeter-totter right at the bottom, and we start energy intake versus energy expenditure. And we're taught this from the ground up. Oh, well, just eat less and exercise more. But it is so much more complicated than that. You can have two people that weigh the same, and they eat the same, and they exercise the same, and one of them weighs a lot more than the other one. There's other factors besides just those things, and so they can be an individual factor, like have you taken a lot of antibiotics in your life? What's your microbiome like? What food do you like? Do you eat fruits and vegetables, or do you really need pizza several times a week? So there's individual factors that affect weight. And then behavioral settings, and this is where we can really make a difference too. Where we work, where kids go to school. So in childcare settings, if the food's healthy, kids will eat better, and that'll affect their body weight. If in a childcare setting they get sodas every day, they'll weigh more. Okay, so that's a known factor. The environment has a big influence in what we do. So kids, so in childcare centers, also at work. I've done a lot of my research on campus with the food environment, and I find that if people, if we have brownies every time we have a meeting, everybody eats brownies, right? And so our work setting can make a huge difference. And maybe we want the freedom to eat brownies, but I don't think we need to have unhealthy foods around just in case, just to tempt people. And then the social norms have to do with, do we have any regulation? What about industry? Is industry regulated? Do we allow marketing to children? Which of course we do. We can market Reese's cups and sodas and all this kind of stuff to kids. So different countries have different norms and different values. Some countries don't allow marketing to children. The United States, we absolutely do that. So anyway, these are just ways to think about. Also think about restaurants. Remember when you used to go to restaurants? You could pick what you wanted. If you went to a restaurant that had healthy food, you had that option. Or where, if it doesn't, then you're just gonna eat whatever's there. So our environment. So this is a slide showing you the microbiome. And I just brought that up. The bacteria that live in your gut are affected by birth. Like if it's a vaginal birth versus a C-section birth, the microbes are different. If the kid has antibiotics, that's going to affect what bacteria grow. And if they consume breast milk versus formula, that's going to change their microbiome. So, and these populations of bacteria can affect risk of body weight in a long period of time. risk of being overweight. So this is something we don't know enough about, but we know it's interesting.
I have a question going back
Yeah.
to the that slide, the
Okay.
one with the social norms and everything. The previous slide from this one. And the reason why I asked you this question specifically was because it was a question that was asked to me, and I didn't immediately have a response to it. But in your professional opinion, looking at all the literature and stuff like that, would you say that it could be considered or should be considered for a child to be extremely overweight or obese, that is a form of child abuse?
Oh my goodness, that is, I have lots of things to say about that. I'm sure that's not a surprise to you, but I think it depends on the parents and what they understand, and also, so it can be, absolutely. I know of families do this where they give their kids junk all day. It's the neglectful parenting, right? One of the parenting style that's neglectful or permissive. So here's candy, you can have whatever you want. If kids have the genetic propensity to gain weight, and then they have that environment, then absolutely they can become overweight. And I would absolutely say that it's a responsibility of the parents. But I also going to say that parents can also be very careful, and kids are still going to be overweight, and it can be because of genetics, and we'll talk about that some more. But also, it's as soon as they go to the neighbor's house or go to school or go to child care center, we gradually lose power over the diets of kids. So the body weight and health of kids is influenced by all these things. But back to what you're saying, can this be can a person consider this to be abuse? I would say that is absolutely possible. I've seen people with 7-month-old kids sitting at a place like Schlotsky's giving them Coke and potato chips. They have to know that's not good for them, right? I don't know, would you label that as abuse? What do you think?
I think for me, I actually do think that it is a form of child abuse, and it is situational, just like a lot of different cases of that nature, and it's very sensitive because it comes down to putting it into question parenting styles, parenting knowledge, whether or not they were actively doing it nefariously, or if they were doing it because they did not know, or they were doing it because of XYZ, their parents did it, what have you. But I do, because in a lot of situations the child doesn't have the power or the means to pick the food from a standpoint of, okay, I'm 2 years old, I'm going to go to the grocery store, pick up spinach, pick up some tomatoes and stuff like that. It more so becomes the way that I was raised, and I love my mother dearly, but it was you eat what your plate, what's on your plate, or you don't eat. So or you eat what's given to you, or you just are not going to eat for that day, or something along those lines. But I would say I would agree with you in the distinction between making it a situational thing where it's not just across the board, because you do have those cases where it's like, even if the parent was as attentive as they possibly could be, it could just be a metabolic state of the child, or genetics, or what have you. So
Yeah, and we can't control a lot of things, but I tend to agree with you on this. So this, we all know this, you've seen this kind of slide forever, right? Portions are bigger now. Everybody's eating more than they used to, unless you don't eat out, or when you go eat out, you cut everything in half, or you share with somebody, and you have to be very proactive, or you're going to overeat. Okay, so this is just some language that's a little bit emotional about this. So this is an article in the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'll never forget the afternoon I asked one of my patients, a 70-year-old, what he was going to do after graduation. He'd been struggling with obesity since he was a toddler, and was now being treated for hypertension. And he goes, I wanted to be a state trooper, but I'm afraid I won't pass the physical. At that moment, I realized that we're not only fighting for his good health, we were struggling for his future. And that's what we dream for children, is that their health does not impair their lives, right? And so this is just some more comments about this type of thing. 1 in 5 children have obesity. A lot of teenagers struggle. The diseases that we've talked about are serious. And so we need to combat this eternally. You look over here there's activity levels on the left. And then on the right, there's healthy eating pattern recommendations. we understand this. Like we can look at a plate, you know, we could set up a menu for a child and say, well, here's how I can distribute these foods to where they would get at 1,000 calories, right? But think about all the foods that don't really fit in here. Frozen yogurt, donuts, candy, this and this and this, cake, you know, there's juices, right? There's so many things that don't really fit in these categories that up those calories. And that's where, you know, for parents who run into trouble, where we have food that really should only be consumed in moderation once in a blue moon, not as part of our daily habit. So in Texas, there's been some good studies where they've had school cafeterias where they label foods go, slow, and low. I don't know if you've seen that, where go is green, eat all you want, it's healthy, slow, eat this in moderation, and low, once in a blue moon type stuff. And kids that have been in these programs where they teach these things have done better and improved their dietary intake. And we've actually seen differences in body mass index in kids in El Paso following programs that change the foods in the cafeteria, train the cafeteria workers what to do, with parent education and so on. If you take a comprehensive approach, we can turn this around, but staying with the status quo, we can't do it. So more emotional things. Obesity is not just a problem affecting patients, families, or communities. Our collective future is in jeopardy. It bankrupts our nation and weakens our workforce. Okay, so all the people, you know, these people now that have been on the front lines, emergency responders, teachers, and parents, you know, are left, depending on their health growing up, are left with these health challenges. So we all have a stake. So none of us is exempt for this, and we all have a stake in making these changes. So this last couple slides are things that we know that work. Support and encourage breastfeeding. You know about that. Responsive feeding, right? You know about that. Help build parenting skills. Make sure healthy food's available. Provide referrals if there are any. I've had so many people call me and say, I have an overweight child. Do you have something we can do with them? And the answer is no, you know, because we don't have those resources. WIC helps, SNAP helps, especially if healthy food's provided. Go for norms where we eat healthy, we exercise, we do stuff. We don't, our norm is not junk food. And make sure that all communities, this is one of those health disparities, all communities have places to play, because there's a big difference in more expensive neighborhoods and the availability of parks and safe places to play versus places without those resources. Business people sometimes will pay and get involved. It's a food supply, good luck with that. And put our money in prevention. You guys are all in a field that's looking at prevention. Let's look at prevention, because it's much, much, much easier to prevent excess weight than it is to treat it. Once people have experienced excess weight, it's a lifelong battle. You can get it off and keep it off, but it becomes a lifelong battle. And there's policy. So this leads into the video. I'm going to stop sharing this. The video that I want you guys to watch. It's the HBO special, and you'll really enjoy it because it fleshes out what we're talking about here. So I'm going to give you an assignment to watch the video, and then an assignment to write something up about it for credit. Okay, so we'll do like 5 points to do that. Normally I would have shown that in class, but we just don't have time to do that. Okay. Questions? You guys good?
I had a quick question.
Okay.
So lately, I feel like a lot of the conversation in the dietetics realm is trending towards health at any size, anti-diet. And I just want to know what your opinion is about that.
Okay, I like this so much. Okay, I've got two sets of feelings on this. One is, man, I'm just so tired of people being pejorative. And there are people that are naturally have different body weights. We come in all shapes and sizes and everything. And so how about we honor diversity and just cut all of that judgment stuff out? So that's one. Okay, so that's when health at any size can really be supportive for people. And I completely endorse that. Okay, however, if I could choose how to influence the health of our nation, I would work very hard to prevent this obesity epidemic because it does not help anybody's lives, right? And so all the things that we talked about, right? It makes life harder for people. So I guess I feel both ways. And I feel so strongly about respecting everyone and providing and helping them. But the other thing about this is I talk about healthy norms, but being overly restrictive is also not a good idea. When we do that, like if families are overly restrictive, kids rebound and eat sugar for 6 years, right? So that's where that normal, like some desserts, let's have healthy food and then let's have pizza night on Friday. Let's don't be so weird that we're the people that nobody wants to eat with, right? So, and because they can even foster eating disorders, and we'll talk about that next. And you sure don't want to start that kind of language with your child. You absolutely, all the language should be about, let's live healthy. And I used to run with my kids a little and they go, Mom, why are you running all the time? I go, because I want a healthy heart, because I like to keep my bones strong. So I'm doing this for this, doing this for this, not for any of that physical stuff where I care about how I look. I mean, we do care about how we look, but that's not what we need to be teaching children. It's not what we need to value above everything. We need to value our health, right? So that's the deal. And so studies show that kids that are overweight and obese, they become overweight and obese adults, and then they die earlier. And they spend more time being sick, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, I feel like it's nuanced. So I just appreciate that perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. Anybody else?
Yeah,
I've got it.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, how receptive do you feel like parents are in hearing, how they should feed their child, or when you're talking to them because their child is obese? Like, what's the difference?
Obesity. Remember the language, has obesity.
Has obesity. How receptive do you think parents are versus when you're telling an adult themselves who has obesity?
Okay, I used to have this part of the lecture. I would talk about this. So for a long time, the clinical profession said, don't use the word obese, don't use overweight, use at risk for overweight and all this kind of stuff. But what happened is people weren't taking them seriously enough. And so they decided to make a national change. It was in 2007, I think. But we've got to tell people what's actually going on here. So, but you can say it in kind ways. You can say, here's what's going on. Here's how to be helpful. And so, and without labeling. And that's where that has obesity versus is obese kind of language. So, but the parents need to know. But they need guidance too. A lot of parents want to help their kids. And there's some parents who they'll have 3 kids and one kid is very overweight and the other 2 kids aren't, and so they're like, well, how do I help this one child? And so they need guidance with this. Watch the special though. I think you guys will really enjoy it. All right, so I'll see you Monday. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.